Jacob Harris returned from deployment to find his home and land stolen, secretly sold by his own HOA while he was serving his country. The HOA president, Marvin Talbot, cold and calculating, had manipulated documents and deceived neighbors for profit, showing no regard for law or ethics. But Jacob's determination and the involvement of the military turned the tables in a way no one expected. And just wait until you see how the military not only restored his property, but reclaimed the entire subdivision, proving that justice, in the end, truly prevailed. Jacob Harris had always believed in doing the right thing. The morning he signed the deployment papers for Afghanistan, he felt a mix of pride and anxiety. Serving his country was not just a duty, it was a calling. He thought of the long months ahead, the challenges he would face, and the sacrifices he was prepared to make. But in that moment, never once did he imagine that the greatest betrayal would not come from the battlefield, but from the very place he called home. His neighborhood in Colorado had been more than a collection of houses. It had been his community, a patchwork of friends, families, and shared memories. His house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place where neighbors borrowed sugar, watched each other's pets, and waved across well-kept lawns. Jacob had invested years of his life, sweat, and savings into that home. It wasn't just a property, it was his foundation, a space that represented stability and belonging. Leaving it to serve abroad was a leap of faith, but he trusted the system in place, particularly the HOA, to protect the community and respect property rights. Months later, Jacob returned home. The excitement of seeing familiar streets, hearing the crunch of gravel under his boots, and smelling the crisp mountain air should have been enough to soothe him after deployment. Instead, his steps slowed as he approached his street. Something was off. The mailbox was new, the yard unnaturally tidy, and there was a tension in the air he couldn't place. When he reached his front door, a stack of official-looking envelopes caught his attention. One, marked urgent, bore his name in a typeface that seemed clinical, detached. With a sinking feeling, he opened it. The words blurred as his mind tried to process their meaning. His home, his land, the place where he had built a life, it had been sold, not to a neighbor, not to someone he knew, but to strangers. Investors with no connection to the community now had control of his property. Worse, the notice made it clear that this had happened while he was deployed, without any attempt to contact him, without a warning, without a chance to contest or even understand the process. A cold, hollow wave of shock rolled over him. His hands trembled, his stomach twisted, and for a moment, Jacob couldn't breathe. How could the very people entrusted with community governance, the HOA, allow such a thing to happen? The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any hardship he had faced overseas. His neighbors, the people he had waved to, shared meals with, exchanged stories and laughter, seemed complicit by their silence. Every memory of community warmth now felt tainted by suspicion and disbelief. For hours, Jacob sat in the driver's seat of his car, staring at the house that no longer belonged to him, trying to comprehend the scale of the injustice. The familiar walls, the garden where he had planted flowers, even the swing set where his nieces played, all of it was gone, as if erased in a bureaucratic stroke. The world he knew had shifted in a way that seemed almost surreal. Shock wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was a weight pressing down, a disorienting mix of confusion, disbelief, and sorrow. In that moment, one thought dominated his mind. He had risked everything for his country, and yet The community he had trusted had betrayed him in the most personal way possible. Jacob realized that the nightmare had only just begun, and the path ahead would demand courage, not just on the battlefield, but at home, against an unexpected enemy, the system itself. As Jacob Harris tried to process what had happened, a new, sharper emotion began to take hold: hatred. Not the fleeting frustration one might feel at an inconvenient situation, but a deep, simmering fury that demanded attention. Every document he scrutinized, every conversation he had with local officials seemed to fan the flames. The more he learned, the clearer the betrayal became, and with it, the target of his outrage emerged. Marvin Talbot, the HOA president, the architect of the scheme that had stolen his home while he served his country. Marvin Talbot presented himself like any typical businessman: polished suits, calm demeanor, and a practiced smile. But Jacob could see through the facade. There was a coldness in Talbot's eyes, a self-satisfied arrogance that suggested he saw people as obstacles to be bypassed rather than neighbors to be respected. He treated the sale of Jacob's property as nothing more than a formality, shrugging off questions and concerns as though ethics and law were optional tools to wield when convenient. His voice, smooth and measured, hid the magnitude of the injustice he had committed. Jacob couldn't fathom how someone could be so calculated, so entirely indifferent to the human consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, community, and respect. Each attempt to reach Talbot was met with rehearsed platitudes and evasions, the kind designed to frustrate and intimidate. And as the realization sank in that some neighbors seemed to have known and stayed silent, the feeling of betrayal intensified. People Jacob had waved to, shared summer barbecues with, or exchanged small talk over the fence. They had all become strangers in an instant, by their silence enabling Talbot's audacious scheme. Jacob's days became a blur of research and investigation. He spent hours combing through public records, HOA meeting minutes, and legal filings. Every inconsistency, every carefully hidden clause that had facilitated the sale felt like a personal affront. With each revelation, his hatred grew sharper, turning cold shock into burning determination. How could a system designed to protect homeowners instead serve as the instrument of their dispossession? And how could the people around him, the very community he had trusted, allow this to happen without protest? The HOA's stonewalling only made the injustice more vivid. Phone calls went unanswered, emails ignored, meetings postponed under bureaucratic pretexts. Jacob felt as though he were navigating a maze designed to exhaust his spirit. And yet, this adversity only reinforced his resolve. Hatred in this case was not passive. It became a driving force, sharpening his focus and clarifying his goal. This was not merely about reclaiming property. It was about confronting the people who had violated trust, exposing their actions, and demanding accountability. Even late at night, as Jacob lay awake thinking of the life that had been taken from him in his absence, the hatred persisted. It was a pulse beneath his skin, a constant reminder that inaction was complicity. The betrayal had transformed his anger into purpose, to confront the deception head-on, to challenge the very system that had allowed it, and to make sure that no one else in his community would face the same violation without recourse. Hatred had become his fuel, and Jacob understood that he could no longer afford to be passive. By the end of those sleepless nights, the emotion was clear. He would not rest until justice had been served. And so, the stage was set. The shock of losing everything had given way to something far more potent, a burning, unrelenting hatred that demanded action. The simmering hatred that had taken root in Jacob Harris finally transformed into action. He realized that anger alone, no matter how intense, would not restore what had been stolen from him. The time for shock, grief, and resentment had passed. Now was the time to fight. Each morning, as the Colorado sun crept over the hills, Jacob sat at his kitchen table, sorting through stacks of paperwork, property deeds, HOA notices, emails, and witness statements. He meticulously organized every document that proved the sale of his property had been illegal, every shred of evidence showing that Marvin Talbot and the HOA had acted without his consent. Jacob's fear had not disappeared, but it had been replaced by resolve. The idea of confronting a powerful, well-connected HOA was daunting, yet he felt a moral clarity he hadn't experienced in months. This wasn't just about reclaiming a plot of land. It was about justice. It was about accountability for those who had exploited rules and bureaucracy to take advantage of a soldier far from home. Each page he examined revealed new layers of deception. Signatures that didn't belong to homeowners, meeting minutes that had been altered, and notices conveniently lost in the mail. The depth of the fraud was staggering, and the more he uncovered, the more his rage solidified into determination. With evidence in hand, Jacob reached out to the military command, explaining the situation and providing proof that the land was legally his and that he had been deployed at the time of the sale. He knew that the military took claims of veteran property rights seriously, and he hoped that presenting a clear, detailed case would compel action. Within days, military lawyers began their investigation, contacting the HOA, requesting records, and demanding accountability. The findings were more shocking than Jacob had imagined. Investigators discovered that Talbot and several other HOA members had forged signatures on multiple documents to legitimize the sale. Entire sections of the community had been manipulated, and the evidence was irrefutable. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a system that had been corrupted from within, all while he had been thousands of miles away serving his country. The betrayal that had once sparked hatred now fueled an unrelenting drive to right the wrongs. Jacob's rage was no longer aimless. It became strategic, focused, and methodical. He attended every meeting, responded to every legal notice, and coordinated with military counsel to ensure no stone was left unturned. Each step forward, each revelation about Talbot's schemes intensified his determination. He realized that reclaiming his home would be meaningful, but holding those who had violated trust accountable would send a message. Deceit would not stand, and betrayal of someone who served their nation could not be tolerated. By the end of the month, Jacob felt a fierce clarity. Rage had transformed him into a force of action, combining intellect, persistence, and moral conviction. This was more than personal vindication. It was a defense of justice itself. The system had underestimated him, but now he was the one dictating the pace. Every call, every document, every confrontation pushed him closer to reclaiming not only his property, but his peace of mind. Jacob's fury had become a powerful engine, propelling him toward resolution. It was no longer about anger. It was about action, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to ensure that justice was done, no matter the obstacles in his path. Months of relentless effort, sleepless nights, and painstaking investigation had brought Jacob Harris to the edge of exhaustion. But finally, the tide began to turn. The legal battles, complicated by the bureaucratic intricacies of both civilian law and military protocols, had tested every ounce of his patience and resolve. Yet with every meeting, every call, and every carefully prepared document, Jacob had chipped away at the wall of deception built by Marvin Talbot and the HOA. And then, the day came when the first decisive victory was announced. The illegal sale of his property had been fully annulled. The relief that washed over Jacob was immediate and profound. Standing in the driveway of his home, he ran his hands over the familiar fence posts, feeling the solidity of what had once been threatened. For the first time in months, he could take a deep breath without the weight of injustice pressing on his chest. But the resolution didn't stop there. As the investigation unfolded, military lawyers uncovered the full extent of the HOA's misconduct. Talbot and his accomplices had not only falsified documents for Jacob's property, but had engaged in systemic abuse that threatened multiple residents. The military, acting decisively, repossessed the entire problematic subdivision, restoring it to lawful control and ensuring that no other homeowner would suffer the same betrayal. The community itself underwent a quiet transformation. Where suspicion and silence had once lingered, a sense of justice and renewed accountability began to take root. Neighbors who had remained passive during the original sale now witnessed the consequences of complicity and the power of determined action. Talbot, stripped of authority and held legally responsible, was forced to answer for his actions, along with the other HOA members who had enabled the fraud. Their attempts to manipulate the system had failed against Jacob's persistence and the oversight of the military intervention. For Jacob, the victory was both personal and symbolic. Returning to the familiar spaces of his home, the porch he had painted himself, the garden he had nurtured, and the living room where his family gathered, he felt a renewed sense of belonging. Every corner of his property, every detail of the house became a testament to endurance, patience, and the courage to confront wrongdoing head-on. It wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about defending dignity, integrity, and the principle that those who serve their country deserve protection and respect. As he looked out across the subdivision, now back under lawful oversight, Jacob experienced a profound catharsis. The tension, anger, and fear that had defined the previous months dissolved into a quiet satisfaction. He had navigated a complex maze of legal, bureaucratic, and ethical challenges, and in doing so, had emerged victorious, not only restoring his home, but ensuring that justice prevailed for the entire community. The story concluded with more than a personal triumph. It left a lasting impression of resilience and resolve. Jacob's journey was a reminder that even in the face of systemic betrayal and deliberate malfeasance, courage and persistence could restore balance. His victory resonated far beyond the walls of his home, inspiring others to stand firm, advocate for justice, and defend what is right. Justice had prevailed, the corrupt had been held accountable, and a veteran who had risked everything for his country had reclaimed not just property, but peace of mind, dignity, and respect.